none of them are getting paid. That means they're trying to figure out, their last paycheck didn't come, they're trying to figure out, how do I pay my mortgage? How do I pay my rent? How do I pay my food? How do I feed my kids? How do I take care of medical bills? You know what the answer from the Democrats is? Every day gets better for us. If you're hurting and not getting a paycheck, Senator Schumer's answer, I do appreciate his doing the Mr. Bird's tent with his hands. I wish he'd started off with excellent. But that is, in fact, his quote, every day gets better for us. It is day 38 of the Schumer shutdown, the longest government shutdown in the history of the United States. Now, Senator Schumer told the world, quote, every day gets better for us. Senator Sullivan asked, who's the us? I'll tell you who the us is. This is a partisan political show. It happened because in March, the Democrats decided to be reasonable and allow the government to stay open. And the extreme left wing of the Democrat Party got furious, and Senator Schumer nearly lost his job. And now the government is shut down because the Democrats want to show the radical left wing and their base that they really, really, really hate Donald Trump. Now, on the Democrat side of the aisle, there's a talking point we actually had in the Commerce Committee yesterday. One of our Democrat colleagues said, there's a Republican president, there's a Republican Senate, there's a Republican House. This is the Republicans' shutdown. And I don't know who actually produces those talking points for Democrats, but every one of them, word for word, says the identical thing. Well, I tell you, I spoke shortly thereafter, and I said, you know, every witness in a court of law, before they testify, they're sworn in, and they're asked that their testimony will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I said what my Democrat colleague just did there failed part number 2, the whole truth. You're right, there is a Republican president. You're right, there is a Republican House, and you're right, there is a Republican Senate. What the Democrats also know is that under the Senate rules, it takes 60 senators to vote to fund the government. They all know that. That's not something they don't know, and it's not an accident that they don't mention it. Why do we have a shutdown? Well, let's count. There are 53 desks on this side of the Senate floor. There are 53 Republicans, which means the government cannot be funded until at least 7 Democrats decide we're going to fund the government. By the way, this is not a new development. When Joe Biden was president, 13 separate times, we passed a clean continuing resolution. What does that mean? We had a 60-vote threshold then, too. That means Republicans could have done this garbage any of the 13 times under Joe Biden, but we did not. They didn't have 60 votes. What was different when Joe Biden was president is Republicans voted with the Democrats to allow the government to stay open. And by the way, in March, the Democrats knew that was the responsible thing to do. It does not take much on the magic Google machine to get video of every one of these Democrats saying on TV, government shutdowns are reckless, they're irresponsible, they're wrong. They all know that. But you know what they're counting on? I look up and the press gallery is virtually empty. They're counting on ABC, NBC, and CBS lying to the American people. They're counting on CNN lying to the American people. They're counting on MSNBC lying to the American people. This is not complicated. 14 times the Republicans on this side of the floor have voted to open the government. And 14 times Democrats have voted to keep the government closed. And then, after they vote to keep the government closed, the Democrats walk out to the reporters and say, gosh, I can't believe the Republicans closed the government. That's when a reporter is actually supposed to do something really radical. It's called report. The person telling me he or she is upset at the government shutdown, why did you vote 14 times to keep the government shut down? Now, there are lots of aspects of this that are painful, but there's one in particular that is impacting American families all over the country, which is any family that is traveling for work, traveling to visit a sick relative, traveling to go to a funeral in a family, traveling to go on a family vacation. There are right now over 50,000 TSA agents. Many of them are going to work. They're not getting paid. They miss their paycheck. There are right now more than 14,000 air traffic controllers. Many of them are going to work. None of them are getting paid. That means they're trying to figure out, their last paycheck didn't come, they're trying to figure out, how do I pay my mortgage? How do I pay my rent? How do I pay my food? How do I feed my kids? How do I take care of medical bills? You know what the answer from the Democrats is? Every day gets better for us. If you're hurting and not getting a paycheck, Senator Schumer's answer, I do appreciate his doing the Mr. Bird's tent with his hands. I wish he'd started off with excellent. But that is, in fact, his quote, every day gets better for us. On Wednesday, there were over 15,000 flight delays. On Wednesday, there were over 600 canceled flights. Delta Airlines has called on the Democrats, vote to reopen the government. United Airlines has called on the Democrats, vote to reopen the government. Southwest Airlines has called on the Democrats, vote to reopen the government. American Airlines has called on the Democrats, vote to reopen the government. The National Air Traffic Controllers Association has called on the Democrats, vote to reopen the government. Yesterday, I had a conversation with the administrator of the FAA. It was chilling. As everyone knows, the FAA announced that it is putting in place a mandatory 10% reduction in flights in the 40 largest airports in America. What the administrator of the FAA told me yesterday on the phone was why. And here's what Administrator Bedford said. He said, last Friday, which was Halloween, half of the busiest 30 air traffic control facilities were short-staffed. That includes New York, Austin, Newark, Phoenix, Washington, Nashville, Dallas, and Denver. I want you to listen to this next statistic. Nearly 80% of the air traffic controllers in New York City called out. They did not show up to work. Nearly 80%. Senator Schumer represents New York City. Nearly 80% of the controllers called out on Halloween. There were rampant delays. The FAA said the aggregate data, the whole national airspace system, looked okay. But then they deaggregated the data, looking at the 40 biggest airports in particular. It painted a very different picture. Here's what the administrator of the FAA told me. Pilots filed more than 500 voluntary safety reports about air traffic control problems they were encountering. Air traffic controllers that were fatigued, that were tired, they were making mistakes. And what's the Democrats' views? Well, there's an old line that a gaffe is when someone in Washington accidentally tells the truth. You heard Chuck Schumer say every day gets better for us. Here's what one Democrat aide told CNN. Another senior Democrat aide said, as long as public perception is in their favor, the party will not concede short of, quote, planes falling out of the sky. That's out of the words of the Democrats themselves. Let me tell you, as chairman of the Commerce Committee, part of our responsibility is to oversee the FAA and to do everything possible to ensure safety. Turning to my Democrat colleagues saying, this is not a joke. First of all, the shutdown happened because Senator Schumer had to demonstrate he was tough, so he didn't get primaried by AOC in New York. Then the next threshold was the No Kings rallies. They had to show they were tough enough that when radicals were marching in cities across the country, they were as angry as the blue-haired, angry radicals. Then we had Election Day. They were going to keep everything shut down to Election Day because it energized their base. And then Democrats won elections in the very blue state of New Jersey, the very blue state of Virginia, and the insanely blue city of New York City. And suddenly Democrats said, holy cow, our really left-wing voters like it when we shut the government down. Are there any Democrats on that side of the aisle for whom responsibility matters? Or is every one of them proud to say, we will keep it shut down until planes fall out of the sky? God forbid that comes to pass. Over 500 voluntary safety reports about air traffic controllers. You got air traffic controllers driving Uber to pay their bills. And here's the good news. We can resolve it right now. Senator Johnson's bill that we will vote on in just a few minutes is very simple. It says any federal worker that goes to work will be paid. If you have to work, if you're a soldier, if you are manning the wall, keeping this country safe, you're being forced to work, you'll be paid. If you're a Border Patrol agent, if you're an FBI agent, if you're a TSA agent, and you have to work, you'll be paid. And if you're an air traffic controller and your job is literally keeping, Mr. President, your children and my children safe when they get on an airplane, you will be paid. And to those in the media who persist in repeating Democrat talking points, understand this. The vote right now, if we vote yes, the air traffic controllers will be paid. If we vote no, the air traffic controllers will not be paid. So every Democrat who votes no is saying we will not pay the air traffic controllers. What does that mean? There are roughly 45,000 commercial flights a day in the United States. The 10% reduction that the FAA has put in place will be roughly 5,000 flights a day that will be canceled. Now, if you assume 100 passengers are on each flight, I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician, so I'm going to make the math simple. 100 passengers, 5,000 flights a day, that is more than 500,000 Americans who will have their flight canceled each and every day the Schumer shutdown continues. More than 500,000. And millions more will have their flights delayed. So it's a simple choice. It is a simple choice. Do you want to pay the air traffic controllers or not? But I got to tell you, you better be ready to talk to your constituents who said, why was my plane canceled when I was going to see my sick mother? Well, because I, Democrat, voted against paying air traffic controllers. That's the answer. You won't like giving that answer. But I'll tell you what, that's a lot better answer than if you have to look in the eyes of someone whose family was killed because the Democrats get what they are explicitly asking for, which is planes falling from the sky. The Schumer shutdown, if you are a left-wing partisan Democrat, you say every day gets better for us. I'll tell you who us ain't. It ain't the American people, so do the right thing because every one of you knows it's the right thing. Vote yes, pay the air traffic controllers, and end this ridiculous shutdown. I yield the floor.